Hello, everybody, and welcome to the official Quitproof podcast. My name is Tom Quitproof Jones, and I'm your host. Our goal with this podcast is to give you insights and inspiration on how you can have a happier, healthier, and more productive life. And most of all, not quit somewhere along the way. You can find us on YouTube at Quitproof, Instagram at Quitproof, #1, Facebook, Tom Jones Quitproof, and our website, www.quitproof.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the official Quitproof podcast. My name is Tom Quitproof Jones. I'm your host. And at this particular point in time, we'd like to introduce our guest for today, Pat Wills. Pat, welcome to the show.
Glad to be on the show.
Thanks for being on the show. We really appreciate it. We want to get some backstory from you and start there. So obviously you're a captain in the fire department at Long Beach, and you've written a book. We want to get into all of that. So where did you start this journey? Where were you born? What did your life look like as a young person? And what got you interested in becoming a public servant in the fire department? And how did all of that evolve? And we'll just kind of build it out from there.
Sure. Well, I was born in LA County, spent the bulk of my growing up years in the city of Huntington Beach, where, Surf City, USA, right? On the beach, hanging out in the late 60s and the early 70s. My cousins, Mark and Gary, they lived up in the valley, up in the San Fernando Valley. And my career in public service really started when I wanted to become a police officer at a very young age. I was just a young kid then, but I had some really good help. It's because my uncle, Bill, was one of the stage managers on a very cool show in the late 60s called Adam 12. So my cousins and I used to go to the set, my brothers and I, and we would go hang out on the set of Adam 12 during the summer. I've been in the Adam 12 car. I've ridden there. I've met Reed and Malloy, and that was my goal. So fast forward to around 1971 or so, I just started high school, and my Uncle Bill gets transferred to a new show, which is the pilot show of a show called Emergency, which was about the start of the Los Angeles County paramedic program. So one afternoon on the set is all it took. I called my cousins up and I said, "Hey, I'm changing careers. Best of luck to you." And that's when my fire department bug was planted. I became a fire explorer in the city of Huntington Beach in 1971, and I was 14 years old. By the time I was 15, I was riding along on the fire engines. I was fought some fires. Probably wasn't supposed to, but I did. And I had some really good coaches and mentors from World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam era. Guys were just getting out of the Vietnam War. They were all joining the fire service, and I was right there when it all started. It's right there when the paramedics program started in Orange County. And that was my first taste of getting into the fire service. Although I had told my cousins I was transferring away from law enforcement, that would come back later on in my career. But I started in the Orange County Fire Department in 1976. I graduated from the Fire Academy in 1975. I was 18. By 19, I was working for the California Department of Forestry here in Orange County. And then I went to the city of Glendale in the LA County in 77 through 1981. And that's when I transferred down to Long Beach, where I stayed for next almost 34 years. So I retired in around 2015. Was a firefighter. I was a paramedic for about 9 years. I was worked at multiple very busy stations in Long Beach. And then in 1998, I took over as the law enforcement bug kind of came back to me. I took over as the supervisor of the fire department arson unit. A lot of people don't realize that fire departments do have a law enforcement capabilities through the Department of Justice and the California legislature to investigate arson fires. So as an arson investigator, we were peace officers. We carried weapons. We made arrests. We testified in court, and it was a very busy time in my career for the last 18 years of my career in the arson unit.
So let me ask you, what was your home life like? What was your mom and dad life? What was that like? What was that part of your life like?
Well, growing up, we lived in the city of Huntington Beach. My mom was a nurse. She was an operating room nurse. So she was, I was used to her being on call. She would get called from home at 3 o'clock in the morning to go do a surgery for somebody that got hit by a car. My dad was in the moving business. He was with Allied Van Lines. And so I was very aware of the transportation industry. I had brothers and sisters. My one brother ended up becoming a firefighter also, and then my other brother Dan ended up becoming a lieutenant colonel in the Army. My dad, ironically, was a World War II vet and was actually stormed the beach at Normandy on June 6th of 1944.
Well, God bless him and thank him for his service. That's quite a story. So okay, so then you were inspired to get into the fire department and into public service through the television show Adam 12 and Emergency, both shows which I watched religiously when I was younger. So I'm very familiar with all the characters that you're talking about. I could see how that would definitely influence you as a fire investigator. You played a dual role, so then you were sworn in as a peace officer and went through
Yes.
that training. You're carrying firearms and you're arresting people and so on and so forth. So you went through the police academy, is that right?
I didn't go through the police academy then. I eventually went through the sheriff's academy, but we did all of our training with the Long Beach Police Department. So it was very. I supervised Long Beach police detectives, and eventually were part of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms part of their ATF arson enforcement program. So I had federal agents and Long Beach police detectives, as well as firefighter investigators that I supervised.
So I'm curious, and you may have touched on this, but I want to elaborate it. So you started out as a firefighter.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And then what?
Actually, Tom, when I started out, it was fireman. My badge said fireman.
Oh,
There was
no kidding.
there was no females. I still have my original badge.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how long ago it was.
Wow, that's interesting. No females in the fire department at that time. Okay, and then what made you go to take a role as a investigator? What triggered that?
It really was. I still never lost that zeal to be in law enforcement. I
Okay.
watched our own arson investigators work cases in Long Beach where I had actually responded to many of the fires, and I watched them do very good criminal investigations, make good arrests, and solid prosecutions. The 1992 riots, I was there. I was there on April 30th, which was the second big day of the riots, and I saw a lot of my city destroyed by arson, and I saw our investigators actually come in and make some of the very best cases and convictions as a result of that crime spree.
Can you expand on that for people like me that really don't know a whole lot about what a investigator does? What role did you play? What were your responsibilities? What does it look like to be a fire investigator? What does that kind of look like and mean?
Well, in Long Beach, which is Los Angeles County, the actual unit itself was a standalone unit. So we were assigned full time in the unit. That's all we did. We were on a 40-hour week. We had take home cars, but our role was to, when there was a fire that was suspicious, not an accidental fire, unless there was somebody hurt or killed, our role was to determine if there was a crime. If there was a crime, then depending on what resources we need, we as the unit itself would go after the suspect. We would write search warrants, but we were also very closely aligned with Long Beach Police Department. So we had a lot of support and a lot of staffing that at any second would come into play if we needed them. We also knew that we needed to take a role that was that's something we could handle. For example, if there was a murder or something, we would simply work with homicide. We'd divide up the duties, which were very clear that we would handle the fire investigation. They're going to handle everything else because these cases are just they're too labor intensive and too manpower intensive.
Who deems whether a fire is suspicious? Do the firefighters that go to the scene and deal with the fire, do they are they the ones that say, hey, this looks suspicious, or there's there a report filed and then that goes to the investigators to get vetted and they go, okay, well, this is suspicious, we need to investigate it? Who deems the suspicion? Where does that start? Where does the red flag get raised and who raises it?
Well, for the most part, the red flag always got raised by the fire captains that responded on the engines. They would get to, I'll give you a good example, a car fire at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not reported stolen. The police run the plate and it comes back financed and it's a new car and maybe it's coming up toward the end of the lease and there's a gas can in the front of the passenger seat. Well, that's obvious. We have some suspicion there that somebody set that on fire. So we would get involved and we would take the case from there. We would respond to the scene, take our photos, package any evidence that we had, and then do all our follow-up investigation on that.
So the fire captain would raise the flag and say, hey, this looks suspicious, can you come check it out? And then they don't touch a thing at that point, and then you come in and investigate. Is that the way it works?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, because that makes sense to me. A fire is a horrible thing,
Right.
period. So
Absolutely.
I can only imagine some of the situations that you ran across. Can you Are you comfortable telling us about some of the stuff that you saw?
Well, anytime in the city of Long Beach that there was a serious burn injury, a firefighter was injured, or there was a fatality, we would respond, and we would respond usually as a team. For example, we would have multiple times when we would have a dead body at the scene, and then we would have somebody in the hospital. So we would have to split the team. Somebody immediately goes to the hospital to interview that person and find out what they knew about the circumstances. And many times these were accidents. They were also arson fires set on purpose. I've had multiple cases with my team where the arsonists themselves were killed in the fire, and the person that ended up hiring that person, which was a good example of an insurance fraud case. I've worked cases, murder for hire, where it was a divorce situation where a lady decided she was going to hire two gang members who decided to go out, and their goal was to kill the ex-husband by the use of fire. Instead of using a gun, they decided they were going to use Molotov cocktails. The only problem was they went and got a case of beer and they drank all the beer, and then they filled 3 bottles up with gasoline and they threw them at the house, and one of them bounced off the window and almost hit the guy in the head, and then set his clothing on fire, which was pretty funny. But those are just the kind of the cases we worked. We also worked multiple cases involving children that were killed in fires, and those are always very unique incidences because they come with a lot of emotion. The one thing that we always want to do as investigators, if we have a burn victim or somebody that gets killed, is we want to find out what they knew at the time of the fire, what they reasonably should have known, and then what the circumstances were in the location where they're found. And that really comes into play with this book that I wrote regarding the December 14th of 2007 fire involving the death of 3 little kids in Long Beach, where they were killed as a result of a little space heater that they were using to keep warm in a location that had been illegally converted into a garage without any permits, and subsequently it didn't have any heating either.
And that is When Children Die, The Reality of PTSD. Is that the title of the book that you wrote?
That is correct. Yes, I wrote that. It was published in May of 2021.
And that was surrounding one particular instance that you just outlined for us. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And and can you tell us a little bit about the book? The title says something about it, but
Yeah, the title's a very powerful title, and it took a long time to think about what the true title of this book was. But the book is called "The Reality of PTSD When Children Die," and it is about my struggle with the death of three kids named Jasmine, Stephanie, and Jocelyn Aviles, who were just spending the night with their aunt at their aunt's house in Long Beach, Central Long Beach. The location, as we would find out on the morning of the fire, was a completely illegal location where it was a garage. It was just simply converted into a bedroom or a living space without any permits. It didn't have any heating. There was a lot of code violations. And because the girls knew that when they would go over there, it was cold that night, they were going to spend the night with their aunt, who I talk about in the book. Her name was Nancy. She survives the fire. They had brought along with them this little tiny electric heater. No big deal, right? Well, the only problem was is that at 2 o'clock in the morning, that heater ended up causing a fire, and it ended up taking their lives. So that was a hugely emotional impact, not only for me, but for all the firefighters that responded that night.
and how old were these three?
Stephanie was 6, Jocelyn was 7, and Jasmine was 9.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you show up to this scene, you start investigating it. I'm imagining that you already knew that people had died in this fire because of the firefighters. Did you already know when you went in, or was it something that you just found?
The girls were actually not at the location when we got there. The firefighters from Battalion 1 had gotten in there. They had found all three of the girls. They were all three in full cardiac arrest. And they did what they always do. They risked their lives to get in there. They did their very best with their paramedic skills, and they took them to St. Mary's and Long Beach Memorial Hospital. Unfortunately, two of the girls would die within the hour, and then one would die within 24 hours. So,
And did they die from the fumes, or did they die from the fire itself, or was it a combination of both?
It was a combination of both. So all three of the girls, at their autopsies, it was determined that they died from carbon monoxide poisoning and smoke inhalation. And each of the girls did have burns on them.
I see.
So
Okay, so you start investigating this, and it's a terrible thing, and it caused PTSD in you. I'm imagining. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. Take us through that.
Well, at the scene, there's a backstory to this case, and the backstory to this case is that at the scene later on in the morning, when we could get our survivor back to the location, what we were finding in this investigation was it was very apparent very quickly that the location was completely illegal. So we got our fire prevention inspectors in there, the building inspectors, code enforcement, Long Beach PD homicide, and we looked at the location very, very, you know, we really looked at it hard, and there was a lot of violations of the codes. The one thing that we found pretty quickly into this investigation, we kept finding these oxygen cylinders in the living room and in the bedroom. And as a former paramedic and captain who had, responded on thousands of medical calls, you always look at these oxygen cylinders as being for use by somebody that has usually emphysema or some type of chronic lung disease, which would be for an older person. So I didn't know who lived at the location. I kept thinking there was an older person that lived there. So we get our survivor back to the scene, and she informs us that there is no older person that lives there. It's just her mother, herself, and her older sister Blanca, who has had cystic fibrosis since she was a young girl, which is it's a deadly disease that really affects a lot of the systems in the body. And eventually the lungs will give out due to the severity of this disease. And Blanca would end up dying 37 days later of cystic fibrosis.
So were they flooding the area with oxygen to aid in her medical condition? Is that where it came from?
Well, she would actually just use that with her mask.
Okay.
Yeah. Blanca, unfortunately, had been sent home from Long Beach Miller Children's Hospital. She had been removed from the lung transplant list, and she was sent home on hospice that she would spend her last days in that little garage. And then she just happened to be gone the night of the fire. We firmly believe that if she'd been there, she probably would have died. But the backstory of the case is this girl who comes out of left field for me, because I didn't know, anything about her. But Blanca would die 37 days later. I actually went to the hospital at Long Beach Memorial the afternoon that she had passed away, and saw her family. And it was a very emotional time that this family would suffer a fourth loss within such a short period of time.
Yeah, that's horrible. That's a lot of loss in a little bit of time. That's for sure. Is that considered an accident with all the violations and code violations? Were they renting the house? Did they own the house? Who was responsible?
No, they were renting the house. The property owner was responsible for all of those. There's a series of things that happen with this case where the district attorney was originally involved because we thought that the property owner would be responsible for the deaths. There's some legal issues that happened. The statute of limitations expired on all the municipal codes, which were the violations through the city of Long Beach. But the property owner was never prosecuted for the loss of the kids.
Wow. And then you end up getting PTSD from it. How did you bring yourself through that, or have you brought yourself through that?
Well, the problem with this case was, and I'll try to explain this. I explain it in the book, is that when you see something like this after 36 years in public service, it kind of rattles you. And I had never seen anything to this degree. I'd seen a lot of stuff in Long Beach and Los Angeles County. I mean, it's a very violent area. I'd never seen anything that had to do with poverty, the deaths of 3 children in the same event, and then this backstory of this young girl who will die 37 days later. I was very fortunate. What I didn't realize is that the family had figured out very quickly that I was having a lot of issues, and it's almost as if they adopted me. And but to be honest with you, regarding PTSD and stuff, is when you see something like this and you're not aware of exactly what it is. I didn't say a word to anybody. I didn't say a word to my wife for almost 3 years. And it just started to manifest itself where it was the only thing I could literally think of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Let me ask you this question. Do you feel that this was the thing that just threw you over the edge, that this PTSD had been building up over years and years and years and years and years and years and years? And then this was the kind of the pebble, which was a huge boulder that started that avalanche. Is it, do you feel, Pat, that it was a totality of everything that you had seen in the past plus this, or do you feel that this was an isolated incident that triggered it and that is it? What are your feelings on that? I'm curious.
It's a great question. I really think when I look back on it that prior to that event, I was actually doing okay. I had not had any issues. There had been some times when you would think of things that would bother you, but for the most part, I just had gone through my career. Trust me, I'd seen a lot of bad things, and there was a lot of sad things, but nothing to the magnitude of this case, especially with our girl Blanca, who comes into play. when her death takes, 37 days later. It was so much at one time. And there was poverty involved, there was fairness and life involved. And, you just see these things and you're just like, how could this ever happen to this family? But it did. So, but to answer your question, I think at the time I had done very well in my career. I was really enjoying being an investigator, being a peace officer, and putting bad people in jail. And so far, it was working really well. It's just that there's other things you have to deal with, and this was something that I had not really dealt with the way it should have been dealt with.
Well, it's
With
amazing that after that long of a career and dealing with bad stuff day in and day out, that you still were able to have empathy and feeling. It's amazing that you just haven't at that point been so desensitized to it that it didn't matter. So that's amazing. And then another question that I wanted to ask you is, when did you figure out that you had PTSD? What did your life look like? How did it change from before the fire? What does a change look like for people that don't really know what that morphosis looks like?
Well, I'll start from the day of the fire. And the day of the fire, the Long Beach Fire Department did have what is called a critical incident step stress debriefing. And this stress debriefing team was called for that incident, but it was assembled for all the firefighters and the paramedics that actually dealt with the initial fire. See, the girls were not there when we got there. They were all in the hospital. But the, to the credit of the fire department, years earlier, they had started this program where they would get together and they would talk about the incident and do some follow ups. Because we were the investigators, we were still at the scene. We were just knee deep in the investigation. I knew about critical incident stress debriefing. I just didn't think at all about having my team debriefed, or let alone myself. If I could turn the clock back, I would have, because I think it would have made a big difference. And then starting to see what I saw, because it actually transpires into the next day when I have to go attend the autopsies of the girls.
Oh my goodness.
Two of the girls were at the LA County Coroner's office. And as I'm standing there over the girls, with my mind just completely flipping out, I get a call from the Torrance Burn Center that Jocelyn has just passed away. So within 24 hours, I knew all three girls were coming to the coroner's office. And, it's just one of these things where it is what it is. It's life. And, as morbid as the autopsy procedure is, or death is, I will give a shout out to the men and women of the LA County Coroner's Office who are just true professionals, that they do completely respect the bodies of these victims that come into their offices.
Was this a slow, did it hit you all at one time like a wrecking ball?
Well, that's a good question. So the day of the incident, when I got this word about Blanca and her condition, that really stuck with me. Then the next morning, when I was at the autopsies, that was another blow. The death of Jocelyn was the triple. And then 37 days later, Blanca would pass away. And there's a lot of grief that's going to transpire through the next 37 days leading up to her death, which was the funerals, the investigation. I still had to interview the mom. I hadn't even met her, about the girls and some of their habits, because I wanted to know what we could clearly determine in this investigation was that these three girls, Jasmine, Stephanie, and Jocelyn, were very heavy sleepers. So, like kids that are younger, up until, some of the teenagers too have these sleeping habits where they initially go to sleep and then they go down so hard that you can't wake them up. I call it the rag doll syndrome, where you can take a child out of a car and they're just limp, take them upstairs, take their clothes off, put their pajamas on, put them in bed, and they never wake up. Well, this is how this mother described her daughter's sleeping habits, which come into play in the investigation as that we can understand why our survivor could not wake them up or get them out of the house. Now, you take that and couple that with the fire gases, the carbon monoxide, and we can clearly see why the girls never woke up, which was actually comforting in the end because then I knew they didn't suffer. We didn't find them in different areas of the house. We found the firefighters found all three of them together under one blanket, which told me that they never moved once they got in that position.
Goodness. So the house catches on fire. Mom realizes it's on fire, can't get to the kids, and the kids perish. Is that the story that it ended up being?
Well, the mom had actually dropped her daughters off to stay with her
Oh, that's right.
sister for the
That's right.
night. So around 2 o'clock in the morning, when our survivor wakes up, she sees the fire right on this heater and it's getting bigger. So she immediately bolts over to the girls, and they're not waking up, period.
Okay.
They're not making any movements whatsoever. So she panics. She doesn't know what to do. She's 17. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Her uncle actually lived right across the backyard into the back house, and she bolts over there to wake him up. Well, they're all asleep. It's winter time. Their heaters are on, and she's going down every window to break to wake people up, and the fire's just getting bigger. And when she realizes that nobody's coming to help her, she tries to get back into the house, and she's just driven out by the flames.
Do you feel that it really hit you after the death of the fourth person? Is that when you feel like it hit you, or when did you realize that you had PTSD, or did you realize that you had PTSD at the beginning? And if so, when did that become apparent to you?
Once, when Blanca passed away at the hospital, that pretty much sent me over the edge. I just kind of lost it at that point. But because, I'm a man, I'm macho, I'm in my 50s, all my mentors were from World War II, Korea, Vietnam. I did not recognize any of the symptoms either. Uh,
Do you have kids?
we do not, no.
Okay, just curious.
So yeah, I have a very loving wife, and I could clearly feel my whole personality starting to change, and it was because my entire life was completely encapsulated by this tragedy, and I would live it over and over and over. I would be on call, and on calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd go back to the location and just sit in the alley in my car, and I would just fantasize about the engines being right around the corner, and then they swoop in and save all the kids. I mean,
I see.
it was crazy, but I never talked about it with anybody
What did
until
what did the personality change look like?
I could not concentrate on anything. I couldn't concentrate. I was irritable. I couldn't sleep. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years later, just by chance, I had a couple of new investigators that they needed to get a background check. And part of that background check was to have a psychological exam. And I happened to talk to Long Beach police psychologist, Dr. Christine Cho. We had a phone conversation. I'd never met her. So I'm talking with her about my investigators. And then she admitted, she goes, I didn't realize we had firefighters that did this type of duties. This is fascinating. And she gave me an insight of what she did as a psychologist. And it became pretty apparent pretty quickly that she was probably somebody that I might be able to talk to. And then as I read about this in my book, almost as if she knew what to ask, she said, is there any interesting cases you have going? And it was at that point that I knew it was time to talk. And probably for the next hour and a half or 2 hours, I poured out exactly what we've been talking about today. And at the very end of that, when I was done, she said, "Congratulations, Pat, you have PTSD."
Goodness. So for 2.5 years, if I'm hearing you right, for 2.5 years, you had been suffering with the side effects, I guess you call it, from PTSD, and you were just stuffing it and dealing with it because obviously you're an alpha male, and that was the role models that you had, and that's kind of how you dealt with it. So for 2.5 years, you were just dealing with it, and then you run across this lady, this doctor, and she, through conversations with you, figures out that you have PTSD. Did you know that you had PTSD, or did you just think, I'm just dealing with it and this is how I deal with it?
It did not, and it wasn't until she said something, and when she said I had PTSD, I said, "Well, no, PTSD is reserved for the military." And she said, "No,
Huh,
it's reserved for you also."
huh.
So she and I had multiple meetings, and she basically kind of revamped my life to the point where I could kind of tell my wife, "Hey, this is what's been going on." And you
Did
know,
it take you a while to accept that you had PTSD, or did you do it based on her assessment of you? Did you accept that assessment, or did you kind of
no, I
re
did. I accepted it. I At that point I knew that something very bad had happened. It was time to deal with this. I didn't discuss it outright with anybody else prior to that or after that initially, um, but I accepted the fact that I had issues because now I had a professional that said, "You're not the only one that has gone through this. You are one of many." And there were some friends that I had confided in, and they said we could see the change. It's it's hard to go back and say when did it actually start. I think it started the day of the fire and the sadness of the actual incident.
did you have trouble accepting the fact that you had PTSD, or were you relieved to be able to put a label to it and go, "Oh, that's what's wrong with me. Now I can go tackle it."
I guess I did, but it wasn't until probably about 3 years later when I gave a presentation for the Orange County Sheriff's Department during a class for coroner investigators that I actually decided I was going to give a lecture on this actual incident on the death of the Avila sisters in Blanca. And it was at the conclusion of that, and I was very emotional during this, and I'm talking with 50 cops and investigators. They don't know me, and I'm got tears in my eyes. I'm cracking up, but I'm getting through this lecture and it made me feel better. But where I really realized that it was going to help me is that multiple people came to me and said, "Thank you for your presentation and thank you for sharing." And then in confidence, people were saying, "Same thing happened to me." I mean, obviously, there's different situations and circumstances. I've had people say, "You told my story. The event is just slightly different, but everything you talked about of what you went through, I experienced it also." That made me feel as if now I was helping somebody else. And now it was completely clear that I was never alone in what had happened to me. The event was different, but I was never alone.
So what did the treatment look like? And how long did you do the treatment? Are you still doing treatment? What does treatment look like for PTSD, or what did that look like for you?
Well, it was Dr. Cho and I would meet on a regular basis to talk about, where I was and how I was doing. The other part of the treatment was to open up to my wife, to my family. And then part of the healing process was getting other people to listen to this story, because you listen to the tragedy of this story, excuse me, and it's mind blowing to see what happened to this family. There's other things that happened in this incident. Was There was guilt of me as a supervisor. I had asked one of my investigators to go to the hospital and photograph the girls who had passed away. We had to have photos of the girls. Well, I didn't realize until later on he was a dad, and he had a little girl the same age as Stephanie Aviles, and that was I just felt terrible about that for years.
It's very interesting, and even though we're all aware of it in the back of our minds, this story really does bring to light how life can change in just a matter of moments. And it can change drastically in just a matter of moments. And this story, to me, really brings that to the forefront of, what a fragile egg we're walking on and how quickly things can go from okay, everybody's sleeping soundly, to, oh my gosh, we got three fatalities and a fourth one 11 days later.
I write about this in my book about the men and women of the fire department who rolled on that incident that night, and I have said this time and time again. Every one of those firefighters would have died to save those kids, and it just did not. It didn't transpire where when they were rolling. I can guarantee they were saying, "We're going to save these kids. There's no question. We're going to save them," and it just did not happen. And we don't work on failure. I write this in my book. The Long Beach Fire Department is not in the business to lose, period. And when it happens, it can be painful.
100%. Let me ask you a question that's it's on topic, but it's a little off topic, and I'm really curious. In your opinion, what makes a firefighter, a person, run into a building that most people would run away from?
Well, it's a calling. It's like being in the military or being in law enforcement. And it all starts with the training. You have to have the training, which gives, and the equipment and the supervision to give you the confidence to start tackling those type of situations. So in your team environment, you are confronted with some type of emergency, and usually you're notified with about 2.5 to 4 minutes of notice before you're there to solve the problem. And you have to critically think, you have to be mature, and you have to have the confidence to use your equipment and your training to go in and conquer these type of situations.
It's amazing, and I just wanted to ask the question, and thank you for the assessment. So, what triggered you to write a book? Was it healing? Was it healing and I want to help other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I felt that I wanted the world to know who these girls were, who this family was. I wanted the world to know who Jasmine, Stephanie, Jocelyn, and Blanca were, and that they were not just from the inner city and they died in this tragedy, and one died of this long-term illness. There was a lot of people that they got to meet over their short life. It affected a lot of people. The incident alone, the fire alone, is something that that had to be told from a public safety perspective. This is I have an issue with what's happening right now in the United States. We're allowing millions of people to come in without having safe housing for them. Where are these people going to go? Safe housing matters for everybody. Yeah, you can convert your garage to a room or someplace where people are going to live, but there has to be proper electrical. There has to be proper exiting. There has to be items that must be in place by the fire code and the building code, like smoke detectors. Those are just the minimums to get people to live in there. And safe housing has to matter for all, and that's not happening because we have so many people and so few housing.
So your fear is that in the upcoming months and years that we're going to see a lot more of this because of that. because people are going to be trying to stuff people in garages and makeshift things that aren't up to code and aren't safe. Your
It's already happening.
PTSD, yeah, sounds like
It's
your
our
PTSD is pinging on this, going, "Hey, you're out in the middle of the street waving your arms, saying, hey, 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 this is going to happen a lot more because of this situation."
Well, it's happening already. We have a huge transient and homeless population where fires are happening in these tents that are along the
Mm.
highways, in these
Yeah.
makeshift areas. It's not their fault that they don't have housing. So it is a problem that is just so widespread that people don't think, oh, well, the worst thing that's going to happen is a fire breaks out, but somebody's going to know about it. And then they're just going to simply get up and walk out and everything's going to be fine. And it just does not work that way.
So how long did it take you to write the book? And was that process just like, was it healing, or was it going back and reliving all of this horror and going through it all over again? How did that process go?
It was a little of both. So I wrote the book so that other people would understand my struggle. I had I clearly knew that other people were saying, "Hey, thank you for telling my story." So it was time to tell the story. There's so many little things that happen in this incident regarding the firefighters. Here's a good example: is Blanca. What many people never knew was Blanca was part of a program at Long Beach Miller Children's Hospital called LBFD firefighters or LBFD kids. And the firefighters had developed this program where they would go visit the kids at Children's Hospital. They would do little Halloween parties, Christmas parties, beach parties for all the kids that were sick and couldn't do any of these fun things. Well, Blanca, it turns out, was one of the very first kids that were involved in this program when she was just 5 years old. And I have a picture of her in a little wagon built by the guys at Station 2. They're pulling her around the children's hospital in this wagon. So fast forward, you know, 12, 14 years down the road, and many of the firefighters that responded to that fire that night had actually met her in the past as a
Oh my
little
goodness.
kid. And they didn't know it. So they didn't know. So this story goes way deeper than just the firefighters and the police officers that were there that night. It went all the way to the first person, the Long Beach fire dispatchers, the police dispatchers that took the 911 calls, to the doctors and nurses at the hospitals that tried to save the girls, to the coroner investigators, to the people that knew Blanca as a young child all the way through till her death, her nurses, her doctors. And not only that, was her nurses and doctors also remember Jasmine, Stephanie, and Jocelyn coming to visit her when Blanca was sick. So that's how many people this this involved, and that's what I wrote in the book, and that's who I give credit to in the book of who it affected, and then of course our families.
Was there a time after the event and before you found out that you had PTSD that you just, or were there many times during that time where you just felt like throwing your hands up and saying, "I quit, I'm done, I don't want to be here," any of that stuff?
No, I never felt that.
Okay.
uh, I felt emotional, but I also felt that there was other things that could be done. And we were lucky that in Long Beach, the city council, to their credit, created what is called the Long Beach Avilis Law. And it really is, in the city of Long Beach at the time, there was a bunch of laws on the books that had to do with illegal garages. And after the fire, we went to the city council and asked if they would just take all those laws and name them the Avilis laws, so that there would be an incident to show why those laws are in place. And that actually happened. And then we went to the state of California, to the California legislature, and the assembly and the Senate actually created what is called Assembly Concurring Resolution 32, which it had to do with Building and Safety Month, profiled the Long Beach incident of why the building code and the fire code were valuable, and that by not abiding by that, a tragedy like the one in Long Beach can happen. And that was a statewide assembly concurrent resolution.
So what I'm hearing is that you were determined to do everything in your power to make sure that this was brought to light, and then by reducing the chances, or obviously hopefully eliminating the chances that this would happen again to somebody else. So that became your Quitproof mission, is to go out and put things in place to where you were definitely taking this tiger by the tail and really trying to do something about it. Is that an accurate statement?
That is accurate. And I've also been able to speak to a number of organizations, from law enforcement to the coroners to fire prevention bureaus all over the state, so that they understand the dilemma also. Code enforcement officers also, that understand that this problem still exists. And I think they're doing their best to try to tackle it. It's just that it's such a big problem that, you know, it's probably not going to go away anytime soon. But if we can just make some inroads to keeping people a little safer, that we'll be well ahead of the game.
Well, I think those end roads are people being aware of it, and it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're going out and making these people aware of it and empowering them in their positions to go out and do as much as they can to prevent it with means of prevention, and doing it that way. And the book tells the story of the sisters and the fire and the incident, and it tells the story of your PTSD and your recovery. Is there more to it than that?
It also tells the story about this little dog that lived next door to us. His name is Atticus. And Atticus, uh, during my struggle with this case, my next door neighbor, Mark and Megan, had this little dog named Atticus. And I would be up in my bedroom trying to sleep, and Atticus would be sleeping on the couch out in the backyard in the sun. And this dog would snore. And then he would talk in his sleep. And I'd hear this ruckus out there, and I'd look out. I put a nice picture of him, to put a couple pictures of him in the book. And I remember looking over the fence, and I'm like, man, I got to get me some of that. Because this
Huh.
dog was like, he was a poster child for sleeping. And the bottom line was Atticus and I became very, very good friends. He was like my care dog, and I just loved him to death. And he was something, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd be petting him and he'd be right there. And you know how dogs are. They just,
Oh yeah.
and he became almost like our little dog over here. He would spend a couple weeks here. Matt, Mark, and Megan had a baby, and Atticus was just like, I'm that kid's killing me. I got to come over and see Pat and Susan. One, I'll get treats, and
100%.
then two, I'll be on vacation. So
100%. So did
yeah,
this incident make you quit the fire department?
no, no. The incident happened in 2007, and then I retired. I formally left everything on the fire department in 2015, but I also am now with the sheriff's department as a reserve deputy.
Okay, so you still go around now and do speaking on this topic to different organizations? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Okay, so you're still out there serving and doing that. What are your plans for the future?
I'm actually going to do an audio book on this particular book. I've had several requests for an audio book, but I do speak. I'm on the with the sheriff's peer support team here in Orange County. I've spoken to my fellow peer support deputies and support personnel about it. The most important thing is to get the word out that talking about a subject that is about a tragedy or something that you witnessed, it is okay to talk about it. I think today, in today's society of law enforcement and the fire service, a lot of the barriers that I was part of, they weren't really barriers. They were just kind of norms in the fire service, right? World War II, Korea, Vietnam, those were wartime veterans. They just didn't talk, right? That's just how it was. In today's law enforcement and the fire service, it's okay to talk, it's okay to debrief. And as a supervisor today, I would highly recommend everybody getting on the same page to be able to talk about an incident or check up on your personnel that you're simply just doing okay without any embarrassment whatsoever. That's the thing about human life that we all have to realize is that we all will have some type of reaction. And it's being able to have somebody just sit down and say, "Hey, Tom, hey, Pat, you doing okay today? Anything going on?" What
Doing some swim buddy checks, some accountability partner checks. I hear you saying that. Do you do you feel that the fire department in particular and the police department, because you're obviously very closely connected with them, have developed resources to help this and integrated that into the training of these folks?
Absolutely, and a lot of those programs are now taught in the academy, where the recruits know right up front that they might be exposed to some. It can be anything, as you know. It can be any situation whatsoever, but they're aware that resources are available confidentially to talk to somebody that may give you some good advice or an answer or give you a direction for greater services like a psychologist or you know there's just so many things that we see today in life from crime, fires, medical aids and people's demise that eventually it's going to catch up with you. You had asked me a question earlier about did I feel that something in the past might have triggered this. In reality, it probably could have. I can't think of an event that did that. I mean, I was in the 70s, the 80s. I was on the riots. I was there when the cocaine epidemic destroyed Los Angeles County, when you'd see multiple shootings just day after day after day.
The thing is that firefighters and police department or police officers and that whole demographic deal with by far and away, I would think, and maybe I'm wrong. Let me ask the question: do firefighters deal with more tragedy than they do success?
I think success outweighs the tragedies because there's new things where, for example, there's in the medical arena, there's more paramedics. There's a 911 system, which didn't come into play until the mid 80s when I was on the fire department. Today, every fire engine has an AED. Most businesses have those. People are CPR certified. So a lot of things where in the 1980s, when I was a paramedic, people weren't starting CPR because they didn't know it. Today, many people have that skill, and there's a longevity or a better way to interact to save a life. Police officers carry Narcan in their vehicles now. That was when I was a paramedic, you had to have a base station order to give that. The cops give that stuff now and save lives on a massive scale, way greater than the paramedics do because the police are right there for
Yeah,
like
that's
drug
really good to know.
overdoses.
That's good to know. So, are you saying that 911 didn't exist before 1980?
911 in the city of Long Beach. I was there. I was a paramedic on Rescue 9, probably 80, 85. It came around.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. It was still a seven digit number. You had to know the number to your own fire department.
Oh my gosh. Do you feel that you're still suffering from PTSD? Does that ever go away? Is it just something that's easier to deal with now that you know what it is and you can put a name to it and you've developed some tools and some therapy? Does it ever go away?
It does not go away. It doesn't go away. It gets a little easier to deal with. I think the therapy is to tell other people. For example, I'm talking to you about this, and it's going to go out to other, members of the public. But I also like fitness, physical fitness, getting out, running, working out. I like to do stair climbs. Um, getting the word out and telling people, hey, look, you're not alone. You're not alone. This happens to a lot of people. You're not the only one this has happened to. You're not the only one to feel this way. I think that's right there is therapy. And also with the advent of peer support and department support. That's the other thing is department support. The California legislature also recently put dispatchers as first responders. I mean, imagine being a dispatcher, hearing the Avila's tragedy, and then you just hang up the phone and it's over with, knowing full well what was on the other end of that. And nobody ever followed up with them. So today they're captured within the peer support groups, debriefs, even the clerical in your fire department or police department that are part of the investigation. We had secretaries that were part of the investigations. They knew everything. They're also part of the system.
What a good point. That is such a good point that this spider web just goes all over the place and touches so many people in different areas. And I could see how it would really affect them because especially like a 911 operator where they're hearing this tragedy completely unfold. They're dealing with it on the front end. The feelings of being helpless and
Yeah.
still having to deal with that would be bad.
Well, and up until recently, probably within the last 3 years, 4 years, they were not, they were kind of that forgotten person. Um, we had a firefighter in Long Beach who was shot and killed on a fire. His name was Dave Rosa. And I remember my old secretary told me the secretaries in the fire department used to have to go down and answer the phones for headquarters or at lunch. And she said that after Dave was killed and the weeks after he was killed, that they would field these phone calls from people all over the world that would call in just to talk about the incident. And she said they just could not handle it. And I remember reaching out to one of the peer support people saying, you need to capture these ladies and make sure they're taken care of. And they absolutely did. They did that. They brought in some of the care dogs, the comfort dogs, and the pets, but they're now all captured in that peer support and debriefing system, which and I admit fully in my book, I admit it today, I did not see the value in it at the time of this incident. I wasn't even thinking about it, but to go backwards, it would have been probably the best thing ever to have probably, you know, not have had some of the heartache that I had.
Well, I totally agree. And I also really applaud you for going out and bringing attention to the story, bringing attention to the whole idea of the PTSD and how far the reach of it is. And I think that because of you and people like you, that the system will put things in place to help deal with this. And from what I'm hearing from you, that's what's happening. Is that right?
That is absolutely what's happening today in law enforcement and public service. There is a greater awareness of mental health issues, and it's a more widespread. It captures more people from dispatchers to firefighters, and also the peer support of family members too that are
Right. The ripple
exposed.
effect. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The ripple effect has to be pretty huge too. And the fact of the matter is that you don't know until you know.
you don't know until you know, and you may not know until somebody kind of pulls you outside and goes, "Here's the problem." And even though I kind of felt like I knew that I had a problem, I still wasn't going to admit it.
I totally get that. And also for people like you coming out, especially because what you just said, like I knew that there was some kind of a problem, but I wasn't going to admit it. That makes you the best spokesperson in my mind to go out and tell this story and to empower people that may have that personality type to, again, like you articulated earlier, like it's okay to go and talk about this. It's okay that you're having these types of feelings. These are human feelings. And it's okay to have them, and there are now resources available to go help you cope with and deal with these things,
And that you're not alone,
and that you're not alone.
that
Yeah,
you're
that's a
not the
big one.
first person that this has happened to. And that to me was the most comforting, that I was among friends.
Did you feel that, and maybe you just felt like this unconsciously, that, and maybe that's just part of PTSD. Maybe you can answer that better than anybody. Did it give you a feeling of I'm alone in this? And it must have, if you're telling me that, knowing that you aren't alone or weren't alone in this, it was a huge comfort to you. So, do you think that that's an effect of the PTSD, or just your personality type, or both?
Well, it's probably from my era that I grew up in the law enforcement and the fire service in. But I did real so what did happen in this incident is one of my investigators and I actually compared notes about 8 years later, and he admitted that he had some issues with the case too. And I did not know any of that. So, as I write in the book, we were in the same office, moving back and forth, never realizing that each of us had the same type feelings on the same on the same incident. And it would have been nice if we maybe had just stopped for 1 second and said, "What about this?" And it, today it's worked out years later, but I did not realize that that had happened.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, hopefully somebody out there will hear this podcast and be going through this, realize what it is, and reach out for help.
Well, I hope they do. Help is out there. My book is The Reality of PTSD When Children Die. It's a true story. It really happened. It happened here in Los Angeles County. And it's about life. It's about first responders. It's about our family members. And it goes deep into the community. And I'm not alone in my feelings. That's the most important thing is, and there's other people that can assist and help out to help others.
Is this a recommended read for people that are in law enforcement and firefighting? Is this something that they recommend that people read? I think that would be like incredibly helpful.
Well, I've had people, recommend that other people read it, but I think it's an individual. It is it's a true story. So it's only one person's perspective, but it takes many dimensions of an incident, and you just think, how can all of this have happened? But in reality, it did.
Okay, is there anything else that you want to add?
Well, the book is available on Amazon. You can get it in paperback or Kindle form, and then hopefully soon I'll be able to do the voiceover book. And we'll keep going. We'll keep talking about it. I forgot to tell you that I did apply for a presidential proclamation through President Trump uh, when he was the president. It actually was through a congressman in Ken Calvert in Riverside, San Bernardino. But it was to designate the day of the fire, which is December 14th, as National Safe Housing Day. And because it's not a law, because it's a presidential proclamation, there's no congressional approval that's needed. It's just the president. So with then Dana Rohrabacher he was a congressman from the Costa Mesa area. He originally started the process, and I was told that the proclamation actually got into the White House. The White House liked it. They thought it was very much of a human. It was for mankind. It was a good thing, and President Trump was defeated. But some of the people that we talked to were confident that he would have signed it as a proclamation for national safe housing. Right? It's a good thing. And aside from any politics, I'd love for President Biden to sign it because it's for the good of everybody. It's
Yeah,
apolitical.
yeah, it's 100% apolitical, and it's about saving lives. That's what makes it apolitical. And I think that it's something that is just off the radar, and you're doing a great job to bring it onto the radar. So massive amount of respect for you, massive amount of respect for your service and your continued service. And we just are really honored to know you and have you on our show. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate the time, and thank you so much for listening to the story.
And everybody out there listening, go get Pat's book. It's on Amazon, it's on Kindle, and I think it would be a really great read. I'm going to go get it.
I'll sign it for you also, Tom.
Perfect. I love it. I love it.
Again, you can find us on YouTube at Quitproof, Instagram, Quitproof, #1, Facebook, Tom Jones Quitproof, and our website, www.quitproof.com. If you like what you're hearing, then hit that subscribe button and recommend this to your friends.